Hello and welcome back to my channel, Talented Reads. So I've decided to kind of curate a reading challenge for myself based off of a book that I can't remember if I bought this or if I received this in a subscription box. But anyways, I wanted to kind of talk about the challenge a little bit, and then it's gonna go from January through the end of the year, December. And so I thought we would talk about the challenge a little bit and then start right off with January books. So let's talk about the book first. That is 101 Horror Books to Read Before You're Murdered. This is by Sadie Hartmann, also known as Mother Horror on social media. She is the co-owner of the Nightworms monthly subscription box, which is horror themed. I am subscribed to that monthly box and I love it. And she is also the editor-in-chief of Dark Hart, or Dark Hart Inc., which is a small publishing company. They do magazines and books. I think I have like 4 of their books, but I actually have not read them, but they are on my bookshelf, and that is Lincoln Apparitions, Human Monsters, and Root Work. So I'm pretty excited about that. And yeah, so let's talk about this book. So first of all, can we just appreciate the cover and the title, because it's freaking amazing. And so this is kind of her list of basically just 101 horror books that she, like, hands down recommends, right? Now, one thing that she makes perfectly clear that I appreciate is, you know, you're not gonna find, like, you know, Dracula, like your classic kind of horror books here, as well as some of the older horror books, right? This list is kind of curated more for the newer generation. You know, there's a lot of really good horror books that are being published currently, and, you know, if you look at a lot of, you know, the scariest books you'll ever read, or a lot of these horror lists, there's quite a few older titles, and I agree with the thinking of, like, let's get some fresh blood in these lists, you know? And so that is one thing that I really appreciated when I was quickly looking through this book. So, obviously, the challenge and the goal is to read these 101 books. Now, obviously, because I'm a horror reader, going into this, I'm going to anticipate that I've already read some of these books, right? I'm not going to reread any. I'm just going to read any that I haven't already read. Now, this book... Oh, it's signed. I don't think I saw that before. Is divided into... Let me zoom in here. So this book is divided into 5 sections. There's paranormal, which is like 3 subsections. And then you have supernatural, which again is divided into 3 subsections. There's human monsters. natural order horror, and then short story collections. Now, I'm basically going to pick one of these subgenres a month and read from that list. Now, the way that she comprises the 101 books, let's go to the back here. So here's kind of the look at the 101. So there are 91 books, like physical books, right? And this is just the checklist of all the books from all the sections. So there's 91 books, and then she comprises books 92 through 101 of author spotlights, right? So what I'm going to do from each of the subcategory is I'm going to pick the books that I have not read from the list, and then I'm going to pick a book from the author spotlight, even if I have already read a book by that author, right? Okay, so let's go through the first one here together. So I'm not going to really read you everything. I want to kind of focus on the books that I'm going to read, and then we'll come back and then we'll talk about the books from that section. I'll link this book in the description box. I encourage you to pick up a copy. It is beautiful inside. It is very well thought out, very well done. If you want to follow along with me, that would be fine. Pick yourself up a copy. You will not regret it. So, in paranormal section, we are starting with haunted houses, okay? Now, again, let's go through this, and really things are going to fall into one of two categories. Either I've read it, and I won't be rereading it, or I have not read it, and it will be on the January TBR to read, okay? First is The Grip of It, which I have read before. Second book is The Book of Accidents, which is a book that I have not read, so that's the first on the TBR. Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey, I have already read. Kill Creek by Scott Thomas, I have already read. The Ancestor by Danielle Trussoni, I have actually not read, so that is a mark for the TBR. And then last is The Switch House by Tim Meyer, which I have not read. There's a fun little game, which maybe we'll do when we come back. And then the author spotlight is Christopher Buehlman, which I actually have read one of his books. I've read Between Two Fires. I gave it 3 stars. It was not my favorite. It is a mix of kind of historical fiction. I really had a hard time with the characters and whatnot, but he is a very popular author. I actually do have 3 other books of his on my shelf. I have The Lesser Dead, Those Across the River, and Black Tongue Thief are 3 that I have on my shelf. So, I think I'm going to pick one of those. Like I said, I wanted to pick another one even if I have already read one. So I did read Between Two Fires, but I'm counting this as a TBR book, and I'll pick one of these 3. And let's see what he's got down here of books that he recommends. So, Oh, he recommends The Haunting of Hill House. Nice. Last Days by Adam Neville. Nice pick. Love that. And The Exorcist. Good picks, Mr. Bielman. Awesome. Alright, and then I think that's it. Yep, and then the next section is Ghosts. Alright, so that's it for Haunted House was our first section. So that was books 1 through 7. And I have 4 on the TBR. So that's it for the kind of introduction. And then when I have read all of those books, I'll come back at you and we'll have a chat. Awesome. See you then. I am back. And I have a ton of books in front of me for us to talk about. So, as a reminder, we were going through our first section of the 101 horror books, which was Haunted House. And I came out with 4 books that I hadn't read. And I forgot to mention, there is a short story collection section in here. There are actually 12 books in that short story collection section. So I'm just going to take one short story collection a month and just include it with my reads. There's probably not a whole lot of those I've read because I love purchasing short story collections and anthologies and then just never get around to reading them. So I'm going to assume like almost all of the short story collections I haven't read. So let's talk through everything. So let's go through the books that are listed in the Haunted House section. So, first is The Grip of It. This is a shorter story, and it's about a couple that move into this rural house. They decided they kind of want to do, drop everything, start over, fresh start, blah, 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 which we always know, because we read a lot of horror stories, that doesn't always pan out the way you think it will. So, I actually read this book a while ago, and recently reread it for, I think, another Haunted House reading vlog that I did, and I really love this book. I think it is highly underrated, and I love my cover. I don't know if you can see, but it has like these drawing details like kind of throughout the whole book, and it's just a really fantastic haunted house story. Now, one thing that Sadie Hartmann has done in her haunted house section is kind of divided the haunted house stories into 2 categories. One is what she calls a Manderley house, and we're talking Manderley as in the mansion from Rebecca, the novel by Daphne du Maurier, in which, you kind of go into thinking, is it psychological, or something really going on in the house? The other part of it is the Hill House, which is based on the house from The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, in which the house pretty much has a mind of its own, and kind of runs the show, basically, right? So she's taken her list and has kind of divided into those 2 ratings. So, The grip of it, she listed as a manderly house, which I would agree with that, because this book, you're kind of following the perspective of the couple, and, you know, they each, while their experiences are different, when you look at the context of the story and as the story progresses, you realize that what they're each experiencing is really not that different from each other, but it plays heavily on the mind, and the author never really draws any sort of conclusion or lays everything out or gets really concrete answers, so you're kind of left in the dark just like the characters, which really adds a nice suspenseful touch to the book. One of the things that I really, really enjoyed. Next is Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. This is about Vera, who has returned to her childhood home to basically take care of her mother in her end of life days. We come to find out that Vera kind of left when she was younger and never looked back. So, of course, now that she's returned to her childhood home, you know, all this stuff is kind of coming back up, and she's reliving memories of her childhood and kind of some traumatic stuff that have happened, and we come to learn a lot of secrets, and this is my favorite Sarah Gailey book. I really, really enjoyed this book. I'm happy Sadie has included this in her list. She marks this as a manderly house, which again, I would agree with. It's that, you know, psychological suspense element. You know, is this really happening? You know, is the character going through some shit, right? So, yeah. Alright, next, work with me here, is Kill Creek by Scott Thomas. This is about four or five kind of famous authors get an invite to come stay at Kill Creek in this mansion, and they are all horror authors, and then some shit goes down, as we know happens in mansions. This is, again, one of my favorites. I thought Scott Thomas did an excellent job weaving together all of these personalities. Sadie calls this a love letter to horror fiction fans, and I would agree. There's a lot of discussion about horror movies, horror books, elements of horror. Of course, you get all of that from the authors that are in the books. And of course, you know, a lot of discussion amongst themselves as they all write their horror a little bit differently. So, very interesting. I really enjoyed it. It is a little thicker. And I thought for sure I was going to get some slow parts, but it actually was pretty suspenseful all the way through. Scott Thomas has another book. Oh, I can't think of it now. I'll put it up on the screen. It's like a red and white cover, but that one is equally good. I really enjoy his writing, so yes, I'm happy to see this book on this list as well. As far as what Sadie slotted it, we're talking Hill House. Again, that is kind of where the house has a mind of its own, and I would say that's pretty solid for this type of a book. Obviously, I don't want to go into it too much and, you know, have spoilers, but yeah, very good book. Alright, so now we get into the books that I had not previously read, that I read for this challenge. And the first one was The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. This follows a family of 3. We have Nate, can't remember the wife's name, and then the son's name is Oliver. And the husband and wife have lived in this town before and have kind of experienced some traumatic things in their childhood, but have decided to kind of put those aside and return with their son. And of course, you know, the town never lets people forget where they come from. I have to say, I did not care for this as much as I thought I was going to like this. I think it kind of lost me in some spots. I will say Chuck took a almost science fiction approach to the trope, which was kind of interesting. However, it's, I don't know, I felt like it kind of dragged on after a while. There's, I'll say, a place that Nate goes to, you know, while he's in this place, I kind of felt like let's move on, you know? But I can definitely see why this book is on the haunted house list, and I think there is definitely a group of readers out there that would very appreciate and prefer this type of haunted house story. And Sadie marks this as a Hill House type of book, and I would definitely agree with that, because I think the house in itself becomes a sort of character in the story and what happens to this family. So that's definitely, I think, marks it as Hill House. Alright, so first read is The Ancestor. Actually, this is the second one, isn't it? Yeah. Is The Ancestor by Danielle Trussoni. This is about, I think her name is Alberta, who receives this kind of letter in the mail letting her know that she's, like, inherited, this massive, castle in Italy, as she is, you know, the well-known family name. She kind of doesn't believe it herself, but decides to go there and see what's up, basically, and kind of learns more about the family and the atmosphere of this house that she's inheriting in Italy. Very, like, gothic feels, and of course, like, I've never been to Italy, but just in, you know, books that I've read or stuff that I've watched on TV, just the descriptions of the city and being in Italy, and it's very atmospheric, and that is what I loved about this book. Now, I will say, Sadie even says it herself in here, that she says here, it would be almost impossible to imagine at the start of the book where it ultimately ends up. And oh boy, that is an understatement. I was totally caught off guard at the direction that this book went. I don't know that I'm 100% here for it. I was expecting something different. I think I wanted something different out of the book, and for that reason I ended up giving it a lower rating than I thought I would be giving it when I first went into the book. It has a very scientific, I'll say, undertone to the book, which is something I don't think you see a lot in horror books. And Sadie put this as a Manderley house, which I completely agree with. I think there is some stuff going on. Of course, it's psychological. You learn a lot about the family history, and societal pressures that the family faced and all that kind of stuff, which was interesting. So all in all, this wasn't my favorite book that's on this list, but I see why it's on the list, and I did have this book on my TBR, so I'm glad I've finally had an excuse to read it. Alright, and the last book that was kind of on the list for Haunted House was The Switch House by Tim Meyer. This was such an interesting premise. It is about kind of like a film crew, and it's literally like switching houses. It's kind of like the name of the show, and so we follow this couple as they're kind of reeling from events that happened during the show, and we kind of come to learn what exactly happened and what's still happening. This is a short book, but it packs a punch. It had me hooked from the very beginning, and that consistent suspense happened all through the book. And Sadie marks it as a Hill House type book, which I think is a solid marking for if you looked at it in the aspects of the house itself. However, I think this also has a lot of psychological suspense and horror. Our characters are, man, they are going through it. It had one of the more surprising endings for me. Surprising in a good way. It didn't end the way I thought it would. It was very shocking. I liked it. I think it played up on more of that psychological trauma, psychological suspense. I've read another book by Tim Meyer, and I actually think I like this one a heck of a lot better than the other one that I read. So, very happy to see this one on this list, and very happy that I was able to read it. Sadie made a comment about this kind of opened her eyes to the talent of the self-published market. And I would agree with that. I think a lot of horror books that I've found at least have been self-published. And, those authors, they don't shy away from some shit. So I think if you're, the extreme horror, I think is a really big self-published or indie published market, and of course there's always gems like this that you find. So if you're not afraid to buy a self-published book or an indie published book, please do, because you find some really, really good gems out there. So happy to have read this one. Now, the author's spotlight was Christopher Buhlman. I have read one of his previous books, which was Between Two Fires, as I mentioned, and it was kind of a historical fiction. It could happen during the Black Plague, but it kind of follows this group of people, basically trying to survive this medieval time period. It was not my favorite. It is a chunky book, and about halfway through, I'm like, come on, Christopher, land the plane, let's move along. It was not for me. I didn't care for any of the characters. There was a lot of really abrasive writing, which now that I've read one of his other books, I think is just his writing style, and I'm just maybe not used to that. But I don't think it boded well for what was happening in the book. So, but I did pick up The Lesser Dead. Actually, I already had it on my TBR shelf, but I think I had this one, Those Across the River, and The Black Tongue Thief, and I ended up picking this one because I was in a vampire mood. And this is, of course, the vampire novel. It is kind of more of a coming-of-age vampire novel, I will say. We follow, what is his name? Joey Peacock, I think, as, you know, him as a young boy, and we kind of learn how he is turned into a vampire, and then just, you know, it moves on to kind of just him surviving in the tunnels. They end up coming across another band of vampires, and it's kind of just a coming-of-age story, learning more about yourself. Again, it has some of that abrasive writing, which you tend to forget that this vampire in this novel is actually a young boy, because of course he's aged, he's older, but because he's a vampire, he just doesn't physically look older, which is a concept I have trouble wrapping my head around sometimes, but, you know, I liked this better than Between Two Fires. Was it a favorite? No, but I did like it better than his other book, and I'm still interested in picking up and reading those other two that I have. So, yeah. Alright, and then the short story collection that I picked was The Beautiful Thing That Awaits Us All by Lard Byrne. I actually had this on my shelf. I was very happy to pick it up. He's got quite a few short story collections, actually. And they're very well known, very popular. I actually have not read a whole lot of this author. And I'm on some horror Reddit groups, and he's highly recommended. A lot of people recommend his stuff, so I was happy to get to it. There was quite a few short story collections in here, or short stories in here. My favorite was the Redfield Girls. I also like the Carrion Gods in Their Heaven and Vast Station, but then the rest of these were just 3 books. Very well put together short story collection. I think it gives the reader a good taste of his style of book and his writing, and I know, like I said, he's got some other short story collections, so I was happy to see this on the 101 horror books because, like I said, he is very well known, very well recommended, so I'm happy to see that he was on the list. I think a lot of people, even if you don't like this particular short story collection, he's published a lot of stuff, so there's something for everyone, I'm sure. Alright, now, one thing, Christopher Buehlman, in the author spotlights that are part of the book, that author themselves recommend some books, so I just wanted to recall what he had recommended, and that was The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, Last Days by Adam Neville, and then The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. I have read all of these, and, you know, although I didn't quite care for Christopher Buehlman's books, I like his reading taste because I loved all of these. The Last Days was my very first Adam Neville book, and it solidified the fact that I need to be reading more of him. And The Exorcist is, of course, a classic. I love that book. Same goes with The Haunting of Hill House, just another classic book. So, yes, awesome recommendations by Christopher Beelman. Alright, and so lastly, I wanted to kind of make my own recommendations, and I thought, if I was making this list, what books would I recommend? So I know Sadie included 6, but I thought of 5. So I wanted to go through those. So first is The Vanishing by Wendy Webb. This is the first Wendy Webb book, and I love her writing. It's very, I don't know what you'd say, like very poetic. It's very soft. It has a very kind of gothic fairy tale feel to it. You know, it's not like real intense in your face kind of heavy stuff. But this book is about a what was her name? Yeah, Julia. She gets this job offer to basically go sit with this famous horror author that everybody actually believed up until this point was dead. So that's kind of intriguing, point number 1. And so, of course, she agrees, because why wouldn't you? So she goes and basically is kind of like a live-in, she's not really like a nanny, but she kind of just goes and sits and helps this kind of author. It has the feel to a movie, and I can't remember the name of the movie. I'm gonna put the movie slide up here. I would say if you liked that style of movie, you would really appreciate this book. Now, as far as using Sadie's haunted house style that she had in her book, I would say this would be a Manderley house. The Rebecca kind of feel psychological. You know, is it you? Is it the house? Like, what's going on? There is, you know, obviously some mystery elements to it. Very soft kind of gothic horror. I think it's very underrated. It is an older book, so I'm hoping to bring this alive again. Next one that I would recommend is another older one. It is Nyctophobia by Christopher Fowler. If you're not aware, nyctophobia is the fear of the dark. So, that in itself should kind of tell you a little something about the book. This is about Callie and her new husband. I think his name was Matteo. Move to southern Spain, and they find this very eccentric house. It is like perfectly symmetrical, and in such a way that half of the house is shrouded in light and half of the house is shrouded in darkness. And you know, while Matteo's working, Callie is kind of a stay-at-home wife, and she spends her time kind of researching this very interesting house and making some discoveries about the house and, you know, the person who built it, and this kind of light versus darkness. I will say, if you have a fear of the darkness, you probably don't want to read this. But for the rest of us, this was a very interesting book. And I like to recommend it to people who are looking for a little something different with their haunted house books. As far as how I would slot it, I would say this is a Hill House type of book. So I don't want to give too much away because I don't want to spoil it. It is an older book, like I said. It's, not fairly long, but very suspenseful. There's some creepy stuff that happens. So, yeah. Next, I would recommend A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. This is a newer book. I think it came out last year. It has a lot of mixed reviews, but I enjoyed the style of writing. I enjoyed this kind of Southern Gothic feel that it has to it. And, if I were to kind of slot it in its rating, I would say this is a Hill House type of book. The Revolters play a part in the book. There's some occult themes. It's a shorter book, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but yeah, really good. If you like the Southern Gothic feel, this is definitely a good one to pick up. Next is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. Now, I know what you're going to say. This is more of a mystery thriller book. I think he is known for mystery thriller. However, I would argue that there's a lot of horror elements that happen in this book. This is about a girl who returns to her house. It's a house her father made famous by writing basically a book and calling it a horror house. She never really believed that, doesn't really think it's haunted, but he's kind of passed on, so now it's up to her to kind of, she's inherited the house, trying to decide what to do with the house and clean it up and, all that stuff. Slotting it, I would say this would be a Manderley House. It is very heavily psychological suspense, psychological horror. There is a mystery kind of behind it, but there's a lot of really creepy stuff that goes on in here. I remember reading parts of this at night, and just the descriptions that Riley has of the creaks and the sounds, and there's a scene in here that involves the ceiling, which if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's very creepy. So I recommend, this is one of my favorite books of his, and I highly recommend it for people that are looking for, I think, more just a creepy kind of basic haunted house trope style of book. This would be right up your alley. And lastly is Remains by Andrew Cole. This is a shorter book, so I don't want to talk too much about it and spoil it. But it is about a woman who basically checks herself out of a I don't want to say like an insane asylum, but she's recently there to kind of help her with the grief of her loss of her son, and she kind of feels like she gets called back to the house of the scene of the crime and feels the presence of her son. I would say, if I was to slot this is definitely, I would say this is a Hill House type story. I think you end up learning a lot about the house itself. This is heavily rooted in grief. So, if you've lost someone, you might want to go into this, gently. But I think it is a fantastic haunted house story. Again, really good psychological suspense. Andrew Cole does a fantastic job building up that suspense, building up the atmosphere. I liked that he has made the house a kind of character in the story. And of course, you know, you get that classic, somebody knows something's going on, but, you know, you're kind of singled out. So, yeah, that's my recommendation. These 5 books right here. Yeah, so I had such a fun time reading through the first section of Sadie's book. And again, I would recommend picking up this book, reading through it. It's a fantastic edition. There's lots of really, really good books in here. So I'm happy to say I have finished 8 of 101. And next section, I believe, is Ghosts, which is what I'll target for February. So I will link Sadie's social media down in the description box, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.